This is what 100 items looks like, and I don't know if this is going to be possible. I've always loved that if you just place blocks in a specific pattern, you can create these sort of factories that just make items. I'm just talking about farms. But that concept is what originally hooked me on Minecraft. So I want to push it to the limit and see if I can make farms for 100 different items within 100 in-game days. With that kind of time crunch, I really can't be wasting my night sleeping, so I spent the day gathering everything I would need to mine through the night. For this world, I did reset the seed a couple of times, because for me to have any chance of pulling this off, I really needed a village in spawn chunks. And even though that was my only requirement, I somehow managed to find the most scenic spawn in all of Minecraft. Sure would be a shame if someone industrialized it. After gathering wood, coal, and a bit of gravel, night came quick. So I picked which local to evict and immediately got to mining. So let me do some quick math. If I have 100 days and I need to farm 100 items, that comes out to roughly 1 item per every 1 day. And like a proper math teacher, it is day 1 and we are already behind schedule. To make matters worse, I'm generally not very efficient when it comes to Minecraft. And this challenge is all about thinking ahead, which is why I put together a plan. There are certain farms that are going to be crucial to make early so that I can start stockpiling the resources for farms down the line. And the first on that list is a villager farm. I guess they aren't technically an item, but I see them as one. But in day 1 fashion, I don't have many resources yet, so I spent the second half of my day chopping down trees. And don't worry, although I'm starting slow, there are tons of sick farms I'll build throughout this video. Due to some skill issues, I didn't manage to reach bedrock on day 0, but the second night went a lot smoother and I was finally able to finish boring to the bottom of the world, where I then used my insane gamer skills to sniff out some diamonds. Yeah, I'm cheating. As soon as morning came around, I got back to working on my villager breeder, adding some farmland and a composter. I then fired the local weaponsmith and rehired him as a breeder, which he seemed to have no issue with. The rest of the farm was as simple as adding some beds and making the separate child and adult chambers. On day 3, I hired an equally eager co-breeder and officially opened up the farm for business, making villagers the first completed item. And I know it's the first item, but this is one of the only 2 exceptions I'll make to what's considered an item. The constant battle I'm running into this world is balancing progression with farm building. Because obviously it's much faster to build farms with maxed out tools and elytra, but those things take time to get, which is not something I have a lot of. But it definitely needs to get done, so I spent the night in the nether, first taking on a fortress and then gathering a couple of ender pearls. I had made enough progress to feel okay about where I stand, so on day 3 I began gathering blocks in preparation for my second farm. An iron farm is Minecraft's most essential farm, as almost all the future farms I make will be using tons of hoppers and minecarts. And this one is a pretty simple farm, so I was able to get a decent amount of it finished by night. And for once, I was actually happy to be interrupted by the night, because I needed a zombie to trap inside before I was able to finish off the rest of the build. But due to some questionable zombie AI, I ended up with a child. Sorry about that wording to anyone who was listening and not watching. The next morning, I convinced a villager to move into my newly constructed 32 square foot glass apartment. And that was when I realized that, I seem to have forgot a rather important block. Which means I have to wait for night again before I build any more of the top. So instead, I worked on the end of life care for the golems. And I needed this farm in order to get the hoppers for the collection, so it will just have to be a hole for now. Before I knew it though, it was night again and I could finally redeem myself with another zombie. This time, I did manage to trap a normal zombie. But somehow in the process, I also trapped myself. I didn't want to break any glass because I didn't have much to fix it, and I didn't want to risk getting knocked off by the phantoms when towering up, so I waited. It was almost morning anyway, and the phantoms would burn, but just sitting idle for like a minute and not being able to get anything done made me realize how anxiety-inducing this challenge is. I just feel like I need to constantly be optimizing every second. Eventually though, morning did come around, but in order to keep building the farm, I need 2 more villagers. And the breeders weren't quite being fruitful and multiplying yet, so on day 7, I used my time to add a precautionary lightning rod to the breeder, and then return to the nether to gather the last blaze rods and ender pearls I need. I didn't know how long it would be until more babies started popping out, so I began preparing for the end journey. I got some obsidian for the portal I'll put in the stronghold, and I made what will probably be the most complicated farm of this video. A snow farm. And of course it rained the second I put the snowman in, so I got another. And with that, I guess technically that is another farm completed, and another item off the list. Overnight, I used that farm to get snow for both cheap building blocks and for projectiles. And as soon as morning came around, I was ready for my journey to find the stronghold. And as it turns out, this seed is scenic and mountainous beyond just spawn. I found a village on the other side of the mountain range, and right as soon as I got there, my ender eye went backwards, so it was time to dig down. Once I found the end frame, I made a nether portal and marked the cords so I could link back up later. But on day 10, it was finally time to take on the dragon. All those years of Club Penguin paid off as my snow walls took down one tower after the other. And I was surprisingly skilled with a water bucket. That's not normal for me. What is normal for me is what happened for the rest of the fight. It took like an entire day. People beat Minecraft as a whole in less time. But eventually I did inevitably win. And after finally freeing the end, I had no time to celebrate as the villagers were now ripe and ready. And I had wasted far more time than I needed to. So on day 12, I started relocating them.
Ooh, my bad, boss.
Way back in the day, I used to move villagers with water streams. Then I discovered boats. And then I discovered minecarts. But by far, the easiest way to move them is with their workstations. It makes them actually tolerable to deal with. The farm now had its 1 zombie and 3 villagers in place and was pretty much ready to be finished up. But I saved the grand opening for the morning and instead used the night to weasel my way up to the nether roof. And of course, I didn't build the portals far enough away from each other, so neither of my portals currently link to the roof one. Surely I won't waste any more time on portals. But it was now day again, so I added the water stream to the top and took out the final blocks to make the farm run. And almost immediately, I got my first iron. The sound of iron golems dying has got to be my favorite sound in the whole game. That farm's completion marks a huge cornerstone for this video and a much needed win in my corner. We have now entered the Iron Age. For those keeping track back home, that means we are now only 4 items down, 13 days in. And one of those isn't really even an item. With a 9-day deficit, time is of the essence. I need to fully utilize all of— Wait. What do you mean? I spent another night mining and placing obsidian for portals? Well, I mean, at least it's finally done. Oh, they still don't work. Nice. And as the cherry on top, afterwards, while I was mesmerized by my iron farm, I lost all 68 of my levels I got from the dragon fight. I just have to keep reminding myself that things will speed up when I finish the game progression and when I have more farms running. But for my own mental health, I needed to do something extra productive. So, after collecting my 7.5 levels, it was end raiding time. Except immediately I realized I had no food, so it was food farm building time. This challenge is all about showcasing farms that are quick and easy to build, that don't require perimeters or complicated mechanics. And this farm keeps very true to the spirit of that, and is one I think everyone should have on their world. If you haven't figured it out, I'm building a hoglin farm. A well-lit pad in the Crimson will only spawn hoglins, and because they run from warped fungi, they can be easily corralled into a killing chamber. And in less than a day, I was already AFKing at the top. For an idea of what this farm is capable of, I think in total throughout this video, I spent about 10 minutes AFKing on this farm and had enough food for all 100 days. With this farm completed, it really felt like the pace was starting to pick up, and this challenge actually had some hope. So I quickly crushed my spirits by trying and failing to link my nether portals again. I just wanted them to be on the ground so they're more easily accessible, and this really looked like it should be enough space, but I caved and just built it in the sky. And although they finally did work, all that time I'd spent until now mining obsidian and moving it was really adding up and weighing on me. Between everything, this had to be like a day or two of wasted time. So after a night of farming snow, I wanted to get another farm on the board before heading out for the end. So I started a small chicken farm. I would need time to populate this farm with egg-laying chickens just to get it running at a good speed, so So I'll build most of it, but really all it is functionally right now is just a hopper collecting eggs. But as nighttime rolled around, I now had plenty of food and plenty of bridging blocks. So it's now officially end busting time. I took my newly constructed cloud, that's what I'm calling it, up to the nether roof and linked back up with the stronghold portal that I made earlier. And now that I had quick passage to the end, I jumped through the gateway to get to busted. Obviously, the elytra is gonna be nice to have and is kind of the ticket item here, but the main reason I'm doing this so early is to get some better enchanted diamond armor and tools so I don't have to worry as much about mining diamonds and spending time enchanting things. Throughout my whole busting session, I only killed enough shulkers for 1 box because I was mostly focused on the other loot, but in total, I raided about 6 or 7 cities before making my way home on day 19. My armor wasn't fully diamond, but elytra did mark the end of the major in-game progression for me. And with all my new loot, I was really running out of space, so I took the day to expand and sort out my chests and explore some caves below my base. But after getting organized, I was ready to take on my next farm, a cobblestone farm. One of the many beauties of Minecraft is you can play by whatever rules you want. For me, that means no duplicating items. So sand farms and carpet farms, for example, I won't be building in this video. However, I'm fine with duping TNT because it's different than actually getting a duped item into my inventory. But I'd be curious to hear if you play with all duping and glitches, none of them, or if you pick and choose like I do. That being said, this farm is going to be so nice as an easy building block for a couple farms coming up. But because this one uses a TNT duper, I was not ready for what was about to happen when I turned it on. It actually worked! And it worked fast! So I let the farm run for only like a minute or so to get all the cobble I need and fill up a shulker with the rest of my needed supplies and promptly left on my way to the next big farm. The Enderman farm is one of the few farms that I feel super comfortable building from memory or on the fly, which could be from the fact that I realistically built around like 10 of them before, or it could just be from the fact that it's like an endermite on top of a tube. Either way, with all those blocks, I was able to crush this bad boy in less than a day. And now I had 2 more items on the list. EXP is my only other caveat to what I'm considering an item, and I'm only gonna count it on this farm. Because honestly, I see this farm as more of an EXP farm than an Ender Pearl farm anyway. So it just makes sense. But again, all the insane farms coming up will be actual real items. And just like every other farm I built, I didn't quite have time to sit and actually use it right now. I had other things to do, like row a villager to a new life as a book dealer. Villagers are probably the most useful thing in Minecraft right now, but because of how they work, they aren't really a farm. So this one mending villager will be the only trading I plan to do in this video. I didn't have enough emeralds to do any meaningful trading right now, so I just locked it in and pondered a way to get more emeralds. If only there was some kind of farm. This next farm might be the pinnacle of easy to build, but lots of items. And honestly, probably the most broken farm in Minecraft right now. Because with essentially a bucket of lava and a bucket of water and just a couple stacks of blocks, it's going to unlock 12 new items for us. It actually makes even more items than that, but I'll explain in a second why I'm not counting all. As far as where I'm building it though, this world just keeps getting better. I think this coast was actually designed to be a raid farm because they work best in an ocean away from land, but with a pillager outpost close by, and a village that's easy to access. But of course, in typical nut fashion, I got to waste the day digging up and building a new portal frame after mine dropped me off at the bottom of the world. And if there's ever a time I wish that the portals would connect to my already made portal instead of making a new one, it is now. So of course it doesn't. And that's officially another day used up entirely by portals. Is it me? But I'm already stressed about time as it is, so I had to make it up by being brave enough to build this farm at night. I forgot to turn hostile mob sounds back on after the Enderman farm. I decided I am not brave enough and used the night to fix my portal instead. What's really nice about this farm specifically is this is all the building that goes into it. The majority of its actual structure is just lava casting, which makes it super beginner friendly. And I was able to get most of it knocked out very quickly. All I needed was a villager, but I'd rather not transport one at night to avoid any zombies, so this was a good night to spend some time at the XP farm, which actually works out pretty well because I will need a sweeping edge and looting sword for this farm. The problem was I ended up being a little overzealous when enchanting and burned through almost the entire next day as well. Luckily, mobs hadn't really started spawning yet, and I was able to move this villager pain-free to his fulfilling new life. All that's left to do is to get a little bad omen and a bucket of milk. And while the milk came rather immediately, the bad omen took a little while. I have never had a captain take this long to spawn. I was literally going on side quests while waiting for one to spawn. I had wasted too much time again and was just about to leave to do something else when I finally spotted one. I eagerly rushed back to the farm, and sure enough, it worked. Whenever I build a farm and it actually works, I don't even feel relieved. It's more like surprise. I'm just much more used to forgetting to place a block that causes like the whole farm to explode or something. Either way, she worked like a charm, and I could add another 12 items to the score. It could be even more than that, but it doesn't really feel fair to count all the witch's potential potions she could drop, so I'm just gonna count them all as one item. This farm also doesn't make saddles, which I didn't realize until after I made it. And finally, I don't want to count this one as a gunpowder farm because I plan on building a better gunpowder farm later. As much as I would love to just sit at this farm and reap all its items, as usual, I don't quite got the time, especially now. I had mapped out all the farms I wanted to build for this video, and this one was supposed to catch us up a lot more than it did. I began to accept the reality that this might take more than 100 days, and I came up with a backup plan. I am going to do everything in my power to keep this video within 100 days, but one way or another, you guys are going to see 100 items farmed, even if it has to turn into a test of how long it would take. Despite my morale being low, at least I did get a little reward. Now having tons of emeralds, I filled my inventory up with all the mending books I could carry and retreated back to my basement, emerging as a new mended man. Remember how I said we'd be making a gunpowder farm later? Yeah, it's later now. And that means it's time for the staple of farms, a classic must-have general mob grinder for all my string and gunpowder needs. Also now with rotten flesh. And I chose to plop it right over this forest. If you haven't noticed, I'm really trying to group most of the farms I can into this area, both so that everything is close together, but also because this is all within the spawn chunks, which means some farms, like the iron farm, can run at all times. And because I can't really AFK any farm, if I spend most of my days building farms over here, I won't need to. And after a night of fighting off phantoms, I realized I built it wrong. But it was a pretty easy fix, so I spent the morning correcting that and then moved on to building at the platforms, which thanks to the cobble generator, I didn't even need to think about. And after finishing the platforms, I took a quick trip to the nether to cover the hoppers with soul campfires. As the game has gotten into its later stages, I spend less nights mining tunnels underground and more nights sorting items and gathering resources. But tonight wasn't one of those nights. A lot of these farms are very redstone heavy and I was out. And I found the raid farm did not produce nearly as much as I'd like. The next morning, I filled the dispensers with water and also the base of the farm. All it needs is the top platform to make it dark and a clock to keep it running. In this challenge, it only ever feels like a farm is worth it if it makes more items than the amount of days it took to make the farm. This farm makes 5 items, and I'm on day 3 of working on it, and I'm fighting a day deficit. So I'll be working through the night to make sure it was worth it. And I'll tell you what, if working nights in-game has taught me one thing, it's that I am not going to be caught counting out blocks again while phantoms can spawn on me. Because that was miserable. But my hard work did pay off, and in the morning, I was able to get the clock set up early so the farm could start running while I finish it. The roof took a deceptively long time, but I was able to get it done in the late night of day 36. And because I started on day 32, this farm just barely took under 5 full days, making it quote-unquote worth it. And with the remainder of the night, I sorted my inventory back into my storage. On day 37, I noticed the eggs were backing up in the chicken farm, so I threw them all into the pen. It finally seemed like I had enough chickens, so I used the string from my new mob farm and added a dispenser to shoot out the eggs. Then I fixed my redstone and the farm was up and running, adding both cooked chicken and feathers to our list of items. So, now that I have elytra and a source of gunpowder, there is one other farm I need, and that's of course sugarcane. Clustering all the farms together has its perks, but one of the downsides is it just looks super messy. And most all of them are haphazardly dotted throughout my spawn chunks, but I want to continue this world past just this video. So I did my best to try to make them in a way that I could build structures around them later. And that's why for my sugarcane farm, I opted for a square. I could eventually form it into some kind of tower, maybe adding more layers of sugarcane, and I really like the thought of being able to see the farm running inside the walls of this sort of farm tower. Unlike the mob grinder and raid farm though, this is one of those farms that will take multiple days for one item. But it's definitely worth it because because this item on its own will save me lots of time over the next 60 days, as rockets will cut down on travel time everywhere, giving me a lot more time to make other farms. And plus, the several days weren't totally spent on that one farm. I also set up a sheep pen so I could start breeding for a future wool farm. And I began exploring the nether during the night, trying to find a good spot for the next farm on the list. And on day 42, I added the last glass to the sugarcane farm, meaning I could get to work on that next project, a gold farm. This is another one of those really in the spirit of this challenge farms. The idea is to make a room at the top of the nether, so you can sit way above the nether ceiling and only that tiny room is loaded. And with a portal in the middle, the pigmen are quickly lured out with the turtle egg to leave room for tons more to spawn. And by day 44, I was blown away by how fast this farm is running. I slaughtered piglins and filled my pockets to the brim with all 3 of the new items that this farm produces. If the next few farms go to plan, we have a real fighting chance to close that gap between items and days. Starting with a moss farm, which I anticipated wouldn't take too long to put together, and in the end would make all 4 of the different moss blocks, along with wheat seeds and bone meal. Definitely a lot of bang for your buck, but I totally forgot I didn't have any moss, nor any idea where a lush cave was. So I left on the search for either a flowering azalea tree that could indicate a lush cave, or a shipwreck that can sometimes have moss in their chest. And after no azalea and a couple of shipwrecks, I finally found one with moss. On the morning of day 46, I started digging underneath my sugarcane farm because I thought it would be cool to put the moss farm under a glass floor there. And plus, I had just learned that crops, including sugarcane, don't grow in spawn chunks unless the player is around. And after exploring, I needed more rockets. I had never built a moss farm before, but this ended up being one of my favorite farms. I also modified it later on with a single lever that could disable a hopper to switch it to just a pure bone meal farm. But because it does have the capability to farm all 6 different items, I was able to add all of them to the list on day 48, and I could move on to the next farm. Also, another one that I've never built before, an automatic crop farm. I realized that if I build up this farm tower any higher, it could cause some problems with my iron farm. And although I'll probably tear down and replace that farm eventually, I'm not going to in this video. So I opted just to build it next door instead. And with the breeder just uphill, it was super straightforward. I mean, I really just built 4 crop fields and then dropped some villagers in it. And on day 51, I had 4 more items to toss on the list. Being over that 50-day mark meant we are just over halfway done, but I was still not caught up with items yet. And at only 42 right now, I'm definitely concerned, to say the least. I still had a few more farms that could check off multiple items, but I also had already built most all of my heavy hitters. So my next few steps had to be perfect. On the morning of day 52, I flew back to the gold farm, but I wasn't there for its items. When I was building the overworld portion of the farm, I noticed a flower forest right next to it, which was exactly what I needed for this next farm. Or I guess I should say next 3 farms. At this point, I had already jumped into a creative copy of the world with a mod called Flower Map. It shows you a map of flowers. Go figure. But it allowed me to pinpoint 2 spots that had a high density of different flower types, all right next to each other. So I could just make 2 farms that would produce tons of different flower types. So after finding the exact coordinates, I towered up and laid out my platforms. The location had to be perfect because it only barely covered the exact blocks it needed to be on, and it would only work at that specific height. I did my best to get the grass laid out before night so I could build it from underneath and use it as a protection from the phantoms. And during the late night of day 52, I finished both of them. And this was my most important milestone yet, because those 2 farms added 10 new items and brought our total up to 52. For the first time in this challenge, I actually had 1 item for every day. But I wasn't done there. The following day, I also built a flower farm for the rare lily of the valley that only spawns in small areas of the flower forest. And that alone wouldn't have been worth it to me, but I also built a farm with the 2 different netherrack grasses to add the 4 additional nether items. It wasn't quite as simple as just adding netherrack though, because each grass type needed an individual bone meal supply, otherwise it wouldn't make its items. I had just enough bone meal to test it though, and sure enough, it makes all 5 items, which brings us up to 57. Finishing those farms and actually securing a lead on the days took a massive weight off my shoulders. I had finally passed the amount of items I needed to be at, and I'm going into the back half with full enchanted diamond armor, elytra, enchanted tools, and all the other farms I've made. But don't be mistaken, this challenge is far from over. There are only so many easy to build farms that give a lot of items, and I had already built most all of them. So I will have no choice but to build farms that only make 1 or 2 items, but may take a lot more days. Any way that I can get ahead, I'm gonna need to. And thankfully, finishing those flower farms means I now have all the dyes that come with them. So it was time for a wool farm. I actually designed this one myself, or I should say figured it out, because it's so simple that I'm sure it's already been designed exactly like this block for block. And up till now, I haven't really been super concerned about the efficiency of any of these farms, but on this one, I tried to maximize the amount of grass around the sheep so that the grass below them can regrow as fast as possible, which is the major bottleneck of these farms. But after building it, instead of trying to neatly bring one sheep at a time, I just broke open their pen and lured over whichever ones I saw first. And by day 57, I had an oversized white, gray, and black sheep farm. Before I could go and dye them all though, I needed cactus, and I've yet to find a desert in this world, so I cleared out my inventory and grabbed a couple stacks of rockets. But before I left, I was also checking the chests on a couple farms, and I realized my crop farm also makes beetroot seeds, and you better believe I'm counting that too. Anyway, I then set out on my journey into the night, because I knew I could easily outfly phantoms. I eventually hit an ocean, which happened to have a couple of monuments in it. I wrote down the coords for no particular reason, and kept flying. And before too long, I came across some bamboo. It wasn't what I set out for, but it will be super helpful. And it's a good sign that I was in a region of warmer biomes. And then immediately afterwards, just before the sun came up, cactus! But I wasn't done there. I had budgeted more time for exploring, so I kept looking around, and I found a mangrove forest. I also remembered to grab some cocoa beans and jungle saplings while I was there, which was lucky because I forgot I actually needed them for the dye. I figured I would just grab them since they were there. On the SMP I used to run, I intentionally never used elytra because I didn't like how they made the world feel so small. But here, I must say they are super handy because I was able to get back home with daylight still left on day 58. But I'm not proud of what I did next. I started a bee farm, which, don't get me wrong, on its own that isn't a bad thing. But this one was just ugly and small. I don't know how else to word that. Once it turned night, I went back to my basement and laid out all the different dyes for the sheep farm. I realized I still needed to get some black dye, so I flew over to the river to hunt some squid. But if you haven't been able to tell, I'm easily distracted and sidetracked. And I noticed I hadn't seen iron golems in my iron farm for a while. And my iron supply seemed to be not refilling. One of the reasons these farms can break is because the villagers don't sleep because they are constantly scared. But I was able to confirm I saw one sleeping for just a split second, which is all they need. I'm not gonna fix this right now, but I will have to sort this out soon, because running out of iron could definitely kill this run for me. But I continued on my way and got my ink. Then as soon as the sun came up, I now had all 16 of the dye infinity stones, and I used them all to turn my black, gray, and white wool farm into the entire Minecraft rainbow. And being aware that my iron supply was dwindling, I decided to just place one pair of shears in each dispenser. But with that all in place, the farm was done. And immediately after, I jumped back over to the bee farm and added the redstone to make it work. I really did intend to get back to this farm later, I just totally forgot. And I'm probably unreasonably ashamed of this tiny bee farm, but either way, it did still produce 2 more items. So on day 59, between the 16 wool colors and the 2 honey products, I was able to add 18 items to the list. I don't even know if I can call this a challenge anymore. I'm now 16 items ahead of schedule, except it wasn't the same. Maybe it was my tiny shameful bee farm or some of the farms that I still had planned to do, but it felt like I was missing the whole point of this challenge. I fell in love with Minecraft because of the cool mechanics behind farms. You build this complicated device that has all the blocks placed in just the right way inside of it to manipulate the game into making items. And I plan to make a tall flower farm. That would have gotten me 4 more items, and it's just a dispenser. I was also gonna make a cactus farm and a lava farm, which, yes, they do have some use, but they're not exciting in the slightest. And plus, I wanted to actually use these farms after this video, and not just build farms whose only purpose was just to check items off the list, then collect dust. So I made a change. For the rest of this challenge, I wanted to have fun and build farms that I would actually use, or even build on my own if there weren't a challenge on the line. So I scrapped my plan and decided to build farms that actually sounded fun. But none of that would mean anything if I can't get my iron farm back online. And I didn't even know where to start with it. Pretty much all of the solutions that I found would require some sort of slime for sticky pistons. And hunting slime underground wasn't really an option for me, so I went out looking for a swamp. And I was eventually able to find one with just barely enough time to get a few slime before sunrise. Before I got working on it though, I did some more research and realized it had stopped working when I added the other villager farm. And I can't find it now, but someone deep in the YouTube comments said that theirs stopped working when a different villager claimed one of the beds. And I watched some replay footage back, and although these two villagers were sleeping, this one wasn't. So I broke his bed and placed it back down. But there would be no way of knowing if that worked until nighttime. So while waiting, I used my time to take care of another problem. With all the hoppers and chests and gizmos I've made, I just never have enough wood. So I spent the rest of the day cutting down trees. And as soon as the sun went down, I flew back home to check the farm. And I was so relieved to hear iron golems dying again. So now that I knew the iron was flowing, I could focus on my next farm. Every farm up until now had felt very minimal and frugal, but this one took 18 stacks of soul sand and over 2 stacks of hoppers. And luckily I had that cobblestone farm because I don't even want to think about how many other blocks I've used. So I had to spend the next few days gathering all those resources that I would need. And on day 65, I set up my camp and started work on the Guardian farm. I also had prepared some potions and I had tons of fun raiding the temple. It was super refreshing doing something that wasn't just gathering blocks or building farms. But it was over quickly because the Elder Guardians weren't very good at hiding. And on day 66, I started work on the farm. I wasn't crazy enough to build a farm that takes any amount of ocean clay. This farm instead was going to use the same shortcut that almost all the other farms have. And that is a super high AFK spot, making the farm the only thing inside your spawning radius. So the only place the Guardians can spawn is inside the bubble columns, where they get pushed up and fed to the campfires. This farm produces both prismarine items, but also catches some unlucky cod and squid. So in total, it makes 4 different items. And on day 69, after finishing the farm, I AFK'd overnight. Mostly because I knew I had a solid lead on items, and I really wanted to see how fast this farm is. Between the 4 different items, it made about 20 stacks, which I was definitely happy with. So I gathered up what I could and headed back home. As much as I was excited for the next farm, I was also worried. I had been back and forth on it because if I wasn't careful, I could accidentally spend way more days than I needed to. But ultimately, I couldn't resist building it. So I started work on my Froglight farm. This is a video of first for me, and frogs are no exception. I've never touched a frog before. And no, that's not a quote from Shane Dawson and his next controversy. I just was super unfamiliar with their mechanics. So I had to look up how it works. Between the breeding, hatching, and growing up, the whole process takes 30 minutes minimum. So any errors could mean a lot of lost time. I set up a box over in the mangrove biome I found earlier and bred 2 rounds of eggs. After the first hatched, I accidentally placed water when trying to catch one of the tadpoles, which broke the other eggs and set me back around half a day. But that was recoverable. So I rebred them and used that night to gather sand at the nearby desert, because this farm is going to take a lot of glass. After I had all the tadpoles I need, I headed back home to find the biomes I need to grow them up in. I already had the white frogs from the mangrove, so I needed the green and the orange. And in the most big brain move of like this whole video, I built an area on the cloud so that there was a chamber of tadpoles in both of the needed biomes. And this farm was going to be built on the nether roof, so this would make my life much easier when moving the frogs. After that was set up, I went back and brought the white frogs up to the nether roof. The farm needs to be built in a basalt biome in order for magma cubes to spawn. And that was where the portal was to the Guardian farm I had just made, so I tied up the frogs over there. With that all sorted out, I then went back and put together all the blocks I need for it. I also checked to see if the tadpoles had grown up yet. I thought since they were in spawn chunks that maybe that would be one of those things that would work, but sadly, I don't think that's the case. So in the meantime, I went ahead and got to constructing the farm. And once I got to the part where I needed the frogs, I tossed the white ones in because they were there, and then I headed back to the cloud to spend the last few minutes needed to grow up the frogs. Trying to lead an animal like a frog through a portal 100 blocks in the air is a recipe for disaster. But somehow everything went smoothly, and I was able to get them all in the farm. After adding the iron golems and closing the roof on day 73, I was able to AFK at the top for a few minutes, and the farm worked beautifully, adding all 3 Froglight colors and magma cream to the item list. I could never have guessed this farm would actually stay within its day to item budget, but somehow miraculously it did. And with still maintaining my lead on the days, I was feeling good and decided to try a farm that I had been really excited about recently. In fact, I had made a whole series of shorts about leader zombies and reinforcements and stuff, even talking about this specific farm designed by ENX04, which, by the way, absolutely massive thanks to the guy. This video would have looked very, very different without him, but I decided to build a copper farm. Even though the converted drowns wouldn't ever drop nautilus shells or tridents or anything, and I already had rotten flesh from the other farm, with 1.21 right around the corner, I figured it'd still be good to get some copper stockpiled. And in no time, I had the farm fully built and ready to go. I just had to stock it with the zombies. And somehow, I had missed this spawner the first time I was in Stronghold, and found it when I went back raiding for books. But this seed was begging me to make a copper farm with that placement. It could not have been easier to move zombies into the inn. And after leading them over, it took just a second for me to get the farm working, but the only thing more impressive than the simplicity of this farm is its rates. I really don't think I've ever seen a more efficient farm. I finished it on day 75, but because it takes so long to get going, I sat there until day 77 just running it. I think I also ran it so long because it's just so satisfying watching something like this work. But I did eventually call it so I could get back to business. Okay, I know I said I wouldn't build any farms like this, but I decided to go ahead and build a cocoa bean farm on day 78, which I will actually use later as it's the only source of brown dye, and I don't do common. But no more actually now, that was the last one. After all these farms, the 2 bottlenecks I'm always running into is wood and redstone. But especially wood right now after the Guardian farm used up everything I had and more. So I decided to build a bamboo farm. I really like the look of the bamboo blocks, but I mostly wanted to throw away wood for things like chests, barrels, pistons, and hoppers and stuff. I made another quick trip over to the swamp for some slime, so I'd have enough for the flying machine in this farm. But other than that, it was as simple as building a collection system with minecart hoppers and then surrounding it with glass. I also centered it above the mob farm so I could enclose it easier down the road if I wanted to. And about 2 to 3 days later, on day 81, it was done. But I held off on testing it until the phantoms weren't just gonna be knocking me off. Either way, it felt good building farms that I actually found useful, even if it means spending more days on it than the amount of items I get out of it. And with that taken care of, it was time to address the other bottleneck, redstone. I was not getting nearly enough from strip mining, so I gave caving a go. I should have taken the extreme terrain around me as a sign that the caves below were also going to be extreme. I can say with certainty, I have never seen a bigger cave system ever. It was definitely the move though, because I was able to find tons and tons of redstone. I had known I was in a deep dark biome, but I didn't know I was right over an ancient city. And I make a lot of shorts showcasing in-depth Minecraft mechanics, but there's something I have to confess. There's a lot of things I haven't done in this game. Ancient city raiding definitely being one of them. But I had my elytra, so I figured I'd give it a shot to see if I could get swift sync. I went for the loud and proud method because I knew I could just fly away. I do not like ancient cities. I had pushed my luck enough, so I went back to redstone gathering, which is when I learned something probably every one of you already knows. Shriekers, the things that spawn wardens, also generate in deep dark biomes. I don't know what had given me the impression that they were only in ancient cities, but that's what I had thought. I suddenly felt a lot less safe going redstone mining that low. So I went back up and kept looking around. And I came across that city again. And man, those chests are so tempting. I just need to fly down and fly out. No danger, quick trip. I definitely got my fill of ancient cities for a little bit, and I managed to get the thing I wanted as well. So I quit while I was ahead and resurfaced on day 83. I flew over to the bamboo farm now that there were no phantoms and gave her a quick test run, and sure enough, everything is working. So I can officially add bamboo to the list. Knowing that's all good to go, and that I now had plenty of redstone, on day 84, I got started on my pumpkin and melon farm. By now, I have a pretty good infrastructure in place on where all my farms were going. And I made the connection that pumpkin and melon farms will also pretty much be the size of a crop field with a single water source. So I put them underneath the automatic crop farm, and this hill made a perfect spot for them. I wanted to make the pumpkin and melon farms as two different farms, even though I could technically just build one and mix the seeds. And over the next couple of days, I built the melon farm and then mirrored the design for the pumpkin farm. I even used a little of the Froglight to decorate and keep the crops lit up. I say decorate, don't get it twisted, they were far from beautiful, but they worked. And I could add 2 more items on day 86. Seeing the numbers in the 80s was such a good feeling for me. I still had the last bit to go, but I was already reflecting back on the earlier days when I didn't even know if this was going to be possible. It felt good to see how far I'd come and that I was actually proud of all the farms I'd built, even if building them had lost me almost all the day lead that I had. And if you're still not buying it, I'm not just doing this for the numbers. My next farm I'm planning on is a shulker farm. I've been using the same single shulker box this entire playthrough, and I want more. But instead of spending a day hunting them down with looting, I'd rather spend multiple days on this one farm, possibly putting this run in jeopardy. And plus, I'm not sure what the general consensus is on how difficult this farm is, but historically for me, this is the bane of my existence. Last time I tried to build one of these, I ran into every possible problem I could have. And with about 13 days left and 12 more needed items, what could possibly go wrong? This farm took a ton of obsidian, so I spent the day in the end mining down a tower. Then on day 88, I cleared out a spot for it to go and started building it. I still wanted to keep it in spawn chunks, but I built it a little ways away from everything so that it wouldn't link with any portals, given my history. I finished the overworld portion on day 90 and moved to the nether, and the nether side really went pretty quick. On day 90, I found the exact world spawn where the shulker will come through from the end, so I set up a rail to take it to the farm. With that done, it was time for the part I was dreading, actually dealing with shulkers. Thankfully, ENX04 outlined super clearly every step of moving the shulker, so you don't even need to contact it. And I found a city that was right next to a gateway. The one problem was that the shulker I was planning on grabbing from the front was replaced by Instone when the city generated, so he was on the side. I'd deal with that at a later date. So I set down my track, then jumped through the gateway to continue the track to the portal. And after flying back to the city, the later date turned out to be the same date, so I had to improvise. Despite a couple of rogue shulker projectiles, on my 92nd night, the shulker was in place. I just wanted to wait until morning to get it running so that the phantoms didn't somehow mess something up. So the next morning, I cleared out all the rails and turned it on. And that symphony of snowballs meant it was working. I went to the nether to verify, and it was true. The 90th item was completed. Except it's the 93rd day. I'm behind again. And not only am I behind, but 100 days is up in 1 week. I started debating whether it was worth it to build all the farms I would actually use, but failing the challenge. And no, it wasn't. Well, it wouldn't be if that were the case, but I had one last card up my sleeve. A bartering farm. Bartering with piglins gives you tons of items. Combining the various levels of soul speed into one item and disregarding repeats like leather and string, I can count 15 new items. But this farm is gonna need even more redstone, and the pumpkin and melon farms used up almost all that I had. So I went out exploring, looking for big caves, because I was not going near the deep dark again. And I had a pretty successful run. I was able to get all my redstone and materials together by day 94, giving me plenty of time to complete the bartering farm. Except my shulker farm broke. And by broke, I mean I built this pad 1 layer too short. And because that shulker was too close, the main shulker in the middle didn't duplicate and just died, which means I had to get a whole new shulker. Now with this bartering farm, I would still have enough items, not including the shulker shell, but I couldn't just let this farm sit broken and not get the item from it. But since finishing the bartering farm would mean I'd still win the challenge, I did the smart thing and got to fixing the shulker farm. And luckily, Ian saves the day for the infiniteth time because the farm can actually restock itself. I just needed to build a new restocking rig above it to drop the shulkers from. So I built that, grabbed the shulker from the overflow bank, and put him back in the farm, getting it up and running again on day 95. With that completed, I could finally finish the last farm. This farm is very similar to the piglin farm in two ways. First, it's built into the ceiling, making use of the player's spawning radius to both spawn piglins, but also to despawn not piglins. Secondly, it uses the player's inventory as the main sorting system. But since there's so many items that you get from this farm, the only feasible way to operate it is with the shulker loader, so you have a chance to keep up with its insane rates. So after finishing the loader, I built a chamber that the piglins are actually sitting in, and then finally the spawning platform. It's called a bartering farm because in the event your piglins die or something happens to them, you can just AFK again for new ones. So it's literally a farm for a farm. The one downside was I had to trust that I built it right, because it can take upwards of a day to stock it with piglins, meaning if I AFK at the top and it doesn't work, I'm going to waste an entire day just sitting, and then I would still need to have time to fix it and then AFK again for another day to finish it. And after nervously waiting, it was the moment of truth. I flew down to my below the roof portal and up to my access point. And I was super relieved to see all of my pumpkin-headed piglins ready to trade, and also alarmingly in sync. But it's not over till it works, and it was time for a test run. I thought I had a lot of gold, but it took seconds to tear through my whole supply. And with that, on day 97, I had finished my last farm for 108 items total. But I wasn't quite done there. Since I had a few extra days, I decided to spend them at my gold farm to farm up enough gold to give this bartering farm a more proper test run. And even still, it just tore through my gold in seconds and filled up almost 8 shulker boxes. So after finishing that, I had the bright idea of giving myself one final last-minute challenge. I would gather one of every item I farmed and put them all together in the same place, and then sleep for the first time to get to day 100. And I had less than a day. For the first time in a while, I was stressed again, but this time it was a good stress. I enjoyed being able to fly around and see all the different farms I had made over the last 100 days. And I filled up my shulker boxes one after the other in the order that I farmed the items. And this would be a good time to say thank you for watching. This is by far the longest video I've ever made, and I'm honored that anyone would stick around and watch till the end. So thank you. And also thank you to all the farm designers who were on screen throughout the video, but I'll also link in the description. This video would not have been possible without them. And after somehow managing to gather all of my shulkers full of items, I towered up to find a scenic view to look out on. And of course, it wouldn't be this world if phantoms and creepers didn't try and take me out one last time. But as the moon began to lower and the sky began to change color, I looked over all my items, then laid down in my bed and achieved sweet dreams for the first time on day 99. I'd be lying if I said there were tears in my eyes, because there weren't. I literally just built farms in Minecraft. Thank you for watching.